as Mihangos, and in this video we're going to be editing 3 photos, one with harsh sunlight, one with a Helios 44M, and a thumbnail photo. The reason I'm doing 3 instead of just 1 photo is because I thought that the first video was a bit limiting to individuals, so this video will cover just a bit more people. I will be releasing these presets for free on my website once I hit 200 subscribers, so make sure to subscribe. I also won't be talking too much about the tone curves, because when I was editing these photos and I was testing them out, I found that the tone curves took forever, and for me to explain it would just drag out the video. And my iPhone also has a limited capacity, and as you saw from the photos, those are the final results you're gonna get. Let's start off with the most basic, and that is bringing the color temperature up so it looks really nice and warm. This looks overpowering and a little bit too warm, but that'll be fixed later on. The tint is at +6. The exposure was at 0.35, and it's okay to use decimals. I use decimals all the time when it comes to this. We're gonna bring down the contrast, and that's because when I use the tone curves, I find that sometimes I just add a little bit too much contrast, and that might look appealing in the moment, but later on I just regret using way too much contrast. We've all been there. So the highlights, we're gonna bring them up +59. The whites is gonna be -12, and that's because I was worried that this stuff right here was gonna clip just a little bit too much, and when I was experimenting, they did. We're gonna add +40 to the blacks, and that's just to bring a bit more detail onto the flower. And then I didn't move around the texture. I did bring down the clarity. I do that all the time, not by a lot, it's just -10 all the time. I think that just gives it a nice sort of a dreamy look. So dehaze -17. And as you can tell, it looks slightly warmer. Most of the time, I don't pay attention to the histogram unless the photo is completely destroyed and I'm trying to find a way to recover it. As you can see from here, the shadows, there's just a bit too much yellow, but I found that I was able to fix them later on with the curves. So we're gonna bring down the vibrancy -22, and then I upped the saturation by 14. Next, we're gonna go into the tone curves. And all I'm gonna do is use edit with me #1, and it looks a lot better. It's still a little bit overpowered here in the corner where the background of the grass is, but that's all fixable. Now we're gonna move on to the hue and saturation panel. And this is where I found that I was able to take a lot of control of the image and the colors, especially with this background right here. It looked really ugly. We're gonna bring on the luminosity. And I didn't use every single color, I just added +4 in the luminosity. I always work backwards. +37 in the yellows. And as you can see, this is starting to look a little bit better. It doesn't look super overpowered. The oranges in the saturation, I added +2. The yellows, -10. The greens, -25. So that's easy peasy. And then when it came to the hues up here, I did -36 in the yellows, -38 in the greens, 38, and that's starting to look way better, right? In the hues, 277, saturation was at 15, and then the color balance was -6, 35 in the hue right here, 5 in the shadows right here. So it's starting to look a little bit better. The details, I just kept it at 50 here. I added a bit more sharpness, even though I was using the 24 to 70. At 70, it's very sharp. And then lens correction, I just removed chromatic aberration. I left the enable profile correction because I like the natural vignetting. So transform, I tried to press auto, but it did this. I did though move the composition. I pressed R on any keyboard, and then I just dead centered it right there. It's starting to look way better. There were no effects because it looked perfectly fine. And then the camera collaboration. So when it comes to this, I feel like a lot of people would just completely ignore it. But for me, I usually go into it, and I can understand why people ignore the camera collaboration. That might be because, you know, you already did everything you could in the hue and saturation panel, but this is ignored in my personal opinion. So we're gonna do -46 in the reds, -8 in the greens, +53 right here. The blue is what really got me to like the image. I just pushed the blue into the 54s, and that's starting to look way better, right? Look at that, the before, the after. So I thought that this corner right here, like this spot, was still a little bit too distracting, so I grabbed a few radial filters right here. I grabbed 2. I don't know why they're like this, but I pressed invert and I brought this down, and then I made another one, brought it down, clicked invert again, minus 46 on there, and that to me looked way better. So that's our first image. And as you can see, we didn't do too much, and I'm not a proponent of the yellow and blue, you know, editing style. I think it's a little bit overdone, so I just try to keep them as minimal as possible. Let's talk about the Helios and editing Helios photos. So this is the final result that we're gonna get, but it took a lot of editing and a lot of time, because what I noticed for most of the Helios photos was that it's really easy to want to use it over and over and over again. It gets really boring. It's really hard to focus, so you always have to check your focus at least 10 times to make sure that the photo is in focus. Be aware of that, but now let's just jump into the photo. So the first thing that I noticed was that it could be a bit warmer. I brought up the temperatures to 7,104. The tint was completely fine. The exposure was just brought up just a smidge because I didn't want to clip this right here. I was probably going to take it into the highlights to fix that. The contrast was plus 39. The highlights, I just kept them the same. I think it's because I played around with them for quite a bit as I was moving through it, and the highlights with this lens, it just seems to not want to play well, so it's really difficult, especially when it comes to my style. And I forgot in what way I was able to fix them so they looked a little bit less annoying. I decided to make sure that the shadows were heightened. Look at the before and after, right? The shadows are brought up. You can see a lot more of her skin detail. Next is the whites. So I brought down the whites minus 100. That just makes the skin look a little bit softer. The highlights in the back look way better. Look at the highlights. They're a little bit too overpowering. They look clipped. That's what you're gonna get with this lens, unfortunately. If you clip, you're gonna clip very hard. I don't think it's very recoverable. Minus 15 when it comes to the blacks. And then I didn't do anything with the texture. I brought down the clarity minus 10. The dehaze plus 43. I think that the dehaze tool is the most functional thing when it comes to old vintage lenses, because it just fixes a lot of the problems. I had to push the dehaze tool quite a bit just so it looks comparable to like the 35 or the 24 to 70 at their base. So I guess it just shows how far we've come in lens technology. I just skipped over the vibrance and saturation. When it came to the curves, I just did edit with me number 2. It might look a little funky. It might look like those people that just throw in a little bit too much clarity down the pipeline, but we're gonna fix that later on as we go. The luminosity, plus 13 on the oranges, plus 41 in the yellows, minus 72 in the greens, minus 91 in the purples. So that's how it usually starts. I wanted to make sure that the detail in the yellow and the greens were being shown properly. You can manipulate it quite a bit, so it looks like she's surrounded by all yellow, but I thought that was a little bit too overpowering to have more than just one color overtake the entire image. I just like the idea of complementary colors. We're gonna go up to saturation, plus 24 in saturation, plus 59 in the oranges, minus 31 in the yellows, minus 50 in the greens, plus 28 in the aquas, and that was for her jacket. Blue minus 18, magenta was plus 34. And in the hues, I just moved around a lot less than I originally thought, so it's 47 on the hues, plus 1 in the oranges, minus 2 in the yellows, minus 10 in the greens. Can really make the greens pop right here, or if I desaturate them enough, it's starting to look like, you know, they're starting to rust, but I didn't like that. I like the idea of just having multiple colors at the end, and this looks soft enough because this photo was taken during the fall that the colors would have done that naturally anyways, you know, like those fall colors that everybody loves. So we're gonna close that down. We're going down to split toning 255 right here, which is more in the blues. Saturation was at 11, just to bring it up a bit. Balance, just kept it perfectly balanced. 123 for the hues, 8 for the saturation. Let's look at the before and after of the split toning. Look at that. It's starting to look way better. I think it really took this side and made it just a little bit more balanced. So we're gonna close that down. The sharpening and the detail, I kept that at 40, so that's perfectly fine. Color, perfectly fine. Transform and lens correction, I did enable it just to see what the effects were, and with the Helios lens you have to do it manually. I'm surprised that it automatically recognizes this, because most of the time with third-party lenses, especially old vintage ones that you slap on there, it doesn't recognize it sometimes. So I was very happy with that result. Transform, looks perfectly fine. And then the effect. So I did minus 13 right here. With the grain, I decided to add like just a smidge. The camera collaboration, I decided to add 11 to the tints. Look at that before and after. Look at that. Plus 23 with the reds, because it is a sunset photo. And I wanted to be just a little bit warmer. The green, left it as it is. And then the blue, minus 21. So look at that. Actually, nah. Okay, so the green was minus 21. Yeah, now I remember. Look at that. I didn't touch the blue. It looks perfectly fine. But now let's look at that before and after. You can see that it does have that vintage look. It does have that swirliness. Right here, her face looks slightly out of focus, but that's why you gotta check your focus constantly with this lens. Now, if you zoom out, her skin looks a lot softer. It looks like she's in focus just a bit more. I like the overall image. I like that there's a bit of green and the greens are fading. Time for our last image. And I think that thumbnails are super important on YouTube. And I much prefer taking the thumbnail of the object when I'm shooting the video. I thought this was really out of my comfort zone because it's more product detail shots. And as you can see, I'm not shooting f1.4. I actually shot this at 7.1 with 35mm. And I just really love the composition. I focused heavily on it because I knew that I was gonna throw a title onto there. So it looks slightly underexposed, but that's because it was a cloudy day. I left the tint and the temperature completely fine. And then I added a lot to the exposure. It was 1.35 to it right here. And then the contrast was plus 47. The highlights were minus 100. The shadows were at plus 57. The whites minus 100. And that's because, you know, these cherry blossoms at the very back, as I was editing the photo previously, I was like, I don't like this. It looks like they're clipping and they're not supposed to. That might turn someone off from just clicking on the video in general. And I was just really happy that I did that beforehand because like the flowers just look a lot better in general. Plus 7 in the black. The texture I left it the same. Clarity minus 3. Usually I bring it down minus 10, but why did I decide to do it minus 3 this time? When it comes to the thumbnail, you want something to look clear and sharp. So that was the choice that I decided to do. Plus 31 on the dehaze. So look at that. You can just see so much detail. And you know, just as a tech enthusiast and being a part of the tech community, you know, we like to see that crispy image. The vibrance minus 5, saturation minus 19. So we're gonna move on to the tone curves. Guys, you guys should be happy that I am not explaining the tone curves because this would be a much longer video. It's starting to look a little bit more contrasty, but we'll fix that as we go. Now we're in the hue and saturation panel. Go on with the luminance. It's minus 20 right here, minus 15 on the greens, minus 5 in the aquas, and as you can tell, I'm taking away a lot of color. The blues, minus 15, the purples, minus 10, and the magentas, minus 25. A lot of taking away colors, and that's to get that really nice and vintage look. Let's move on to the saturation, minus 15 on the reds, minus 28 on the orange, minus 71 in the greens. So the blues get plus 15, the purples get minus 10, the magenta get minus 20. So it's starting to look a lot better. Like if we look at her before and after, just taking away some colors, making sure that it looks a little bit more intriguing. Plus 8 on the hues, on the reds, minus 2 on the orange, minus 24 in the yellows, minus 31 in the greens. We skipped over the aquas, plus 3 on the blues, magenta and the purple. We put 30 on the purple and the magenta at 15. 285 to the split toning. Saturation is at 4. The balance was minus 3 as we moved along. The shadows is 41 and 13. And I think the split toning is where all the magic happened, where I'm like, oh, okay, this is a good representation of the Canon camera because it's a very old camera, probably around like 25 years old now. The EOS 300 is my favorite film camera. Everything on here looks perfectly fine. I removed the chromatic aberration and I was really like confused if I should enable the profile correction or not. But again, we're tech YouTubers, so I just left it on because it looked way more flat and a little bit more sharp. Transform, I just left it as it was. I did minus 12 on the vignetting, just add a bit more focus to the camera. The calibration tool, I added plus 9 to the tints, plus 9. The red hue was at 47. Look at that. All right. The green was at plus 1 and the saturation was at minus 10. The blue primary was at negative 20, saturation at plus 10. So that's the final results. When it comes to the third photo, I really like it. I love the EOS 300 video. I think that's one of my favorite videos that I've made because the EOS 300 is a very underrated camera. I think the biggest thing that I focused on with the photo was the composition because as you can see from the thumbnail, there is a Canon EOS 300 right there. So I left enough space in case I wanted to add graphics. I could have left it by itself, but I chose not to because I don't feel like a lot of people know about the EOS 300. and it's just gaining a lot more popularity. I edited 3 photos. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and let me know what you think. What would you have done differently? And let me know if you guys would want me to edit just purely Helios photos, because it's really fun, but you really got to pick and choose what you're doing when it comes to the lens, because too much of a good thing is definitely bad. So that's it for right now. Make sure to check out my podcast and subscribe, comment, and like. At the end of the day, I thank you so much for your time and your attention. My name is Isaac Mihangos, and I'll catch you in the next one.